My name is Lucy, 32 years old, and I live in a small coastal town in Oregon, where the mornings are misty and the cafes always smell like cinnamon. My life used to be peaceful. I worked at the public library, restocking books, organizing story time for children, then coming home to a quiet, comforting stillness. I thought I would live like that forever. Until he walked into my life. I met Brandon on a crisp October morning at a cafe called Birch and Bloom. I was in my usual corner, rereading notes for the children's reading program, when he stumbled in, hands juggling 2 cups of hot coffee and a paper bag of cinnamon rolls, crashing into my table and sending papers flying. He blurted out, "Oh God, I'm so sorry, I didn't see." I looked up and saw a man with slightly messy brown hair, a face that was both embarrassed and genuinely apologetic, scrambling to pick up the scattered pages. For some reason, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in months, someone caught me off guard. He looked at me and said softly, "How can I make it up to you? Can I take you to lunch as an apology for ruining your hard work?" And I said yes. Brandon was an architect. He loved old houses and had a quirky habit of sketching historical buildings in pencil every weekend. He often called me the iron-hearted librarian after I once refused to extend his book loan, even though he brought homemade cookies to plead his case. On trips to the farmer's market, he would pick out the ugliest onions just to make me laugh. He didn't need to try to be romantic. His natural warmth was what drew me in. We got married after almost a year of dating, in a small ceremony under the pine trees behind my house. There weren't many guests, just enough to fill 2 rows of wooden chairs. The air was chilly, but his hand in mine was warm. I'll never forget what he whispered as he placed the ring on my finger. "I won't promise to be perfect, but I promise I'll choose you every day." After the wedding, we moved into a little house on the edge of town, a red-roofed fixer-upper with a wooden porch and bougainvillea blooming outside the kitchen window. I loved how Brandon strung up our wedding photos with twine and clothespins. We painted the living room a warm cream, planted lavender in the garden, and baked bread together every weekend. Married life wasn't flashy, but it was full of kindness. He brought me coffee in bed, waited for me to get home from the library so we could have candlelit dinners. Once, when I had a high fever, he stayed by my side all night, changing cool towels every hour without complaint. Another time, I cried over a heartbreaking book, and he didn't say a word, just wrapped me in his arms and let the silence hold me. I used to think if happiness had a shape, this would be it. But what I didn't know was that when a third person enters what seems like a perfect life, things don't fall apart all at once. It starts with little things, subtle, quiet, like winter sneaking into the house through a draft you didn't notice. Brandon got a call from his mother on a Tuesday afternoon while I was watering the lavender on our porch. He stepped out, holding his phone, with a conflicted look and a quieter than usual voice. "Mom wants to stay with us for a bit after the divorce." I paused. How long is a bit? Brandon glanced at me, a little guilty. "She said just a few weeks. Her new place in Eugene isn't ready yet. I think it won't be long." I nodded, not thrilled, but I understood. After all, she was my mother-in-law. Her name was Clarice. 60 years old, sharp, reserved, once a respected university lecturer. I'd only met her a handful of times before the wedding, and none of those lasted more than an hour. Clarice moved in 3 days later. A black SUV pulled up in our driveway. She stepped out in a long gray trench coat, her eyes unreadable, pulling her luggage with the kind of control that didn't need assistance. When Brandon opened the door, she gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, then turned to me. "Lucy, you clearly have a gift for growing lavender, but watering in the late afternoon? That'll rot the roots, you know." I gave a tight smile. Her first words to me were a correction. At first I tried to be gracious. I invited her to dinner, asked about her teaching years. Her answers were short, polite, and punctuated by frequent glances at her watch. But what unsettled me wasn't her distance. It was the tiny, quiet changes. One morning, I noticed the spice rack had been rearranged alphabetically. My bookshelf in the reading room no longer followed my color-coded system but academic categories. She said, "You're a librarian. Surely you understand structure better than anyone. When I washed dishes, she stood behind me, gently noting. Brandon never liked the dishes turned upside down. I always set them face up so the water drains properly. Brandon just chuckled. Didn't think twice. But I began to feel replaced, one detail at a time. By week 2, I came home late after a meeting and found Clarice in the kitchen wearing my apron. The air was filled with the smell of roasted chicken, the very dinner I had planned. Brandon was at the table, beaming. Mom made my favorite tonight, Lucy, even pumpkin pie for dessert. I smiled, but inside I felt cold. That kitchen had been ours. Now it was a stage, and I was standing off script. Clarice never said anything outright cruel. She was subtle, razor-sharp beneath velvet. One night, as I prepared stew, she hovered behind and murmured, "Oh, Lucy, no salt first? Brandon's always had a sensitive tongue, didn't he tell you?" I served the stew a bit too salty. Brandon didn't notice. He ate it all and said, "Maybe next time, a little beef broth too?" I heard it, but I didn't answer. Her suggestions started to carry more weight with him. One morning I said I wanted to rearrange the reading room to work more comfortably. Brandon hesitated. "Mom thinks we should keep it as is. She says it looks neater." Or when I asked what he wanted for dinner over the weekend, he replied, "I think Mom already planned something. She said not to let you tire yourself out." Not to let me tire myself out. It sounded kind, but I felt pushed to the sidelines of a life I helped build. One night, while preparing laundry, I saw his clothes folded differently. A sticky note on top read, "Brandon always preferred his shirts folded vertically, easier to find. Mom?" That's when I realized I was no longer allowed to touch the things that once felt like mine. Brandon became more irritable, asked why I was so quiet lately, said I'd become moody, told me, "Mom's only trying to help." But I knew, some help isn't help at all. It's control dressed in concern, a subtle way of saying, she understands him more than you ever will. That night I lay awake, listening to the ticking clock and the soft click of Clarice's door closing. And I realized I was no longer the only woman in my husband's heart. I found out I was pregnant on a Saturday morning while reorganizing children's books in the library's reading room. The wave of nausea came so suddenly that I had to hold on to the shelf to steady myself. At first I thought it was just stress and exhaustion, but by the 3rd time that week I was dry heaving before eating anything. I knew something wasn't right. On the way home, I secretly bought a pregnancy test and slipped it into my purse, careful not to let Clarice see. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I stepped into the bathroom, hands trembling with nerves. 2 lines. Clear. Undeniable. I sank to the cold tile floor, arms wrapped around my belly, tears blurring my vision. I didn't know if I was crying out of fear or hope, but one thing was certain. This tiny life was mine, and I wanted to protect it. Whether Brandon was still mine or not. In the days that followed, I lived in 2 worlds, one weighed down by physical exhaustion from pregnancy, and the other by the silent distance growing between me and my husband. Brandon no longer held me at night. He no longer texted reminders to eat lunch. The sweet things he used to say were replaced with cold, vague questions like, "Why are you in the bathroom so often lately? Your eating schedule's been all over the place." I knew Clarice had planted the seeds of doubt in him. She didn't have to say it out loud. Just a suspicious glance when I felt nauseous was enough. One evening I overheard her whispering on the phone as I walked in. "She avoids eye contact. She's definitely hiding something. Brandon, you should be careful." I wanted to scream, to tell Brandon about the baby growing inside me, that I wasn't hiding anything, I was just searching for the version of him I once trusted. But before I could speak, the silence between us filled every space. I started writing a journal for the baby, in a leather-bound notebook I used to jot down things I was grateful for. Every morning I wrote 1 line. "I'm still here, little one. I'm trying." I hoped this child would be the one thing that brought Brandon back. He used to dream of a home filled with children's laughter. He used to spend hours picking paint colors for a nursery that didn't exist yet. He once said, "If I have you and a kid running through the yard, that's all I'll ever need." So I made a plan. A beautiful, gentle evening, enough to remind him why we fell in love in the first place. I chose Friday, the day Clarice usually played cards with her friends at a club 10 miles out of town. I woke up early to bake baguettes using his favorite recipe. I made triple layer lasagna and a beet salad with lemon honey dressing just like on our 4th date. I lit candles around the table, laid out our embroidered linen napkins, and placed a small gift box beside his plate. Inside it was a folded white baby onesie printed with the words, "Hi, Dad." My heart pounded when I heard Brandon's car pull up. I straightened my dress, took a deep breath, smiled, and told myself, "Just look at me like you used to. Just one look and everything will shift." But Clarice walked in first. Card night got cancelled. "Lucy, I hope you don't mind if I join you for dinner." I froze, my fingers tightening around the wooden spoon. I couldn't say no without putting Brandon in an awkward spot. "Of course not." He walked in right behind her, offering only a casual smile. "Smells amazing. Did you bake the bread?" I nodded. That nod swallowed everything I wanted to say. Because tonight wasn't about pride. It was about a quiet truth growing inside me. Dinner unfolded under soft candlelight and Clarice's watchful eyes. She asked if I'd used whole wheat flour because Brandon gets bloated easily. She said the salad was a little tangy, then smiled and said, "Brandon never liked sharp flavors, did you?" He chuckled along, and I no longer heard the sound of my own heartbeat. I cleared the plates, eyes flicking to the unopened gift box still sitting beside his napkin. I didn't open it, not tonight. I needed a moment of peace. I needed to see the man I loved without looking through the haze of his mother's whispers. But fear crept in. A cold, creeping fear that maybe Brandon no longer stood on my side. I don't remember exactly when the atmosphere in my kitchen changed, but I do remember that it was the moment I brought out dessert. The spoon clinked to a halt. Clarice stood beside Brandon, resting her hand on his shoulder, leaning in to whisper something I couldn't hear. But I saw his eyes. Those warm eyes I once trusted suddenly freeze over, sharp as winter ice. Brandon set down his spoon and stood abruptly. The chair scraped loudly across the floor. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low and hoarse, staring straight at me. I froze. "What do you mean? What are you hiding from me, Lucy? Don't play dumb." His voice rose. Clarice stepped back, but her gaze never left me. No concern, just quiet satisfaction. As if this entire scene had been rehearsed in her head a dozen times. I clutched my napkin. "I don't know what you're talking about. You think I'm blind? You think I haven't noticed you running to the bathroom all week, dry heaving with no explanation, avoiding any kind of touch? You think I'm too stupid to notice something's off." His tone turned into a shout. I stood up, eyes stinging. "I was gonna tell you, I just hadn't found the right moment." "No, Lucy, you were hiding it. You didn't think I deserved to know." I didn't even have time to speak before the slap landed, sudden, so fast I couldn't react. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a whip. My left cheek burned like fire. I stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the table for support. My heart felt like it had stopped. Brandon, the man who once kissed the tiniest scratch on my hand while gardening, had just slapped me. The air shattered. I didn't cry, but my stomach clenched, sharp and violent. A wave of nausea surged up my throat. I turned, ran to the sink, and threw up so hard it felt like my insides were coming out. Brandon's voice called behind me. "Jesus, Lucy, what's wrong with you?" As I collapsed to the floor, my purse slipped off my shoulder. Something small rolled out, hit the table leg, and stopped right at his feet. A pregnancy test. Pale pink, 2 clear lines. Brandon bent down, picked it up, his face went pale. "Is this?" I looked up at him, instinctively cradling my belly. "Yes, I'm pregnant." Silence fell over the kitchen. I could hear the ticking of the clock and the soft wheels of Clarice's shoes against the hardwood floor. She said nothing, just stood there, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, cold line. But something in her eyes, something like satisfaction, flickered. Brandon dropped the test, straightened up, and stepped back. I saw fear flash across his face, not because he hurt me, but because He didn't recognize himself anymore. Right then the front door burst open. Lucy. It was Meredith, my neighbor from 2 houses down, a high school teacher who once brought me banana bread for the holidays. I don't know what she heard from outside, but her face froze when she saw my flushed cheek, messy hair, and me sitting on the kitchen floor with the pregnancy test between us. I heard a crash. Is everything okay? Brandon stepped back. Clarice chimed in, calm as ever. We're just having a small family misunderstanding. Meredith ignored her. She walked straight to me, knelt down, and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Come with me, right now. I looked at Brandon. He didn't say a word, didn't make a move to stop me. I stood, shaky, letting Meredith guide me out. As the door closed behind us, I heard Clarice murmur, probably to Brandon. See, I told you. My legs trembled, but my hand still rested on my belly. My child. Mine. And I knew in that moment, I wasn't just leaving a house, I was stepping out of an illusion. Meredith didn't ask a single question on the way to her apartment, a small unit on the 2nd floor of a red brick building down the street. She just opened the door, flipped on a soft yellow light, made me a mug of ginger tea, and pulled a quilt over the couch. I sat down, still holding my belly on reflex, my left cheek still warm, but the real pain was buried in places no one could see. Meredith sat beside me, said nothing empty or useless, just placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, I'll call a doctor in the morning. The next day, she took me to an OB/GYN clinic less than 3 blocks away. It was quiet, the walls painted pastel blue, a vase of baby's breath on the reception desk. Everything felt deliberately gentle, like it was built to hold fragile hearts. When the doctor placed the probe on my belly and the screen lit up, I held my breath. A heartbeat appeared. Tiny, clear, strong. You're about 6.5 weeks, she said. Everything looks stable. I didn't respond. Tears streamed down, but there were no sobs. That moment, that little heartbeat, held me together like a thread. Meredith turned to the doctor. Would you mind recording that sound? And the doctor nodded. That night, I sat alone in Meredith's living room, porch light shadows drifting across the curtains. I opened my messaging app, attached the audio file, and typed only 3 words. Your child's heartbeat. No blame, no anger, just a piece of truth, sent to the man who once swore to protect me. It was marked read within minutes. Then a new message appeared. Please meet me, just me, no mom. I swear. I stared at the screen, torn. Part of me wanted to block his number, erase every trace. But the part of me carrying this child needed to know if he was still the man I once trusted. I typed slowly. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Maple and Sage Cafe. Then I added a single condition, with no frills. If your mother shows up, I walk away, forever. His reply came instantly. I understand. I'll come alone, I promise. The next day, I sat at the window seat, holding a cinnamon tea, eyes watching the cobblestone street. Maple and Sage was where I used to read alone before Brandon entered my life. Maybe in some way, I was hoping to meet that version of myself again, the Lucy before everything fell apart. At exactly 2 p.m. the door opened. Brandon walked in, alone, wearing a faded blue shirt, empty-handed, looking like he'd barely slept. He paused when he saw me, uncertain, fragile. Can I sit? He asked softly. I nodded. No greetings. He sat, keeping distance, a strange carefulness between 2 people who once shared everything. I know. There's no excuse for what I did, Brandon began, voice raw. I didn't see how far I'd drifted until you disappeared. And then, that sound, the heartbeat. He stopped, covering his face. I didn't cry. I kept my voice even. I didn't come to hear you apologize. I need to know. Will my child be safe with you around? Brandon looked up. I swear I'll do whatever it takes to prove that. You can set any conditions. I'll follow them. I sat up straight and pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket pocket. I already wrote them down. 3 conditions. If you break even one, I won't look back. He took it, opened it, and read slowly. When he reached the last one, his lips trembled, I agree. All three. I'll prove it not with words. I looked out the window, my heartbeat steadying. It wasn't forgiveness. But maybe it was the beginning of protecting myself and the small life growing inside me. Brandon sat there gripping the paper I handed him like letting go would make all hope vanish. I didn't rush to say anything else, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed control over my own voice. He spoke first. She lied. About everything. I kept my gaze on my tea, but my chest tightened. Right after you left, she called Aunt Charlotte, just as I was coming down the stairs. She didn't know I could hear. She said you were dangerous, that you were using the baby to trap me, that you were seeing someone else. He clenched his fists. And then she laughed. Said she finally freed me. I looked up slowly. And you believed it until the test fell at your feet? Brandon dropped his eyes, saying nothing, but I didn't need the answer. I pulled out a second sheet from my bag and placed it lightly on the table. These are the 3 conditions. No halfway, no negotiations. He opened it and read line by line. With each sentence, his posture sagged just a little more. 1. Clarice is never allowed back in our lives. No visits, no information about the baby, nothing. 2. You attend weekly individual therapy, and we attend couples counseling. No delays, no empty promises. 3. If you ever lay a hand on me again, even once, I will press charges, file for full custody, and never return. He looked up. I agree. I wasn't convinced. I'd heard easier promises before. Words meant nothing without action. He pulled 2 business cards from his wallet and placed them neatly in front of me. One's a family attorney. She's already drafting the agreement. If I violate Rule 3, you get full custody. No dispute. My signature's on it. All you need is yours. I went still. The second is a therapist. I had my first session yesterday. And this. He opened the calendar app on his phone. This is our first couples counseling appointment. You can call to confirm if you want. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. You're doing all this for me? No, he said, shaking his head. For the baby, for myself, and because you gave me one last chance, even when I didn't deserve it. I looked outside, at the dry maple branches shifting in the early winter breeze. I wasn't sure I could trust anyone again. But I knew this. The child growing inside me deserved a father who wasn't controlled, manipulated, or a shadow of Clarice. I'm not coming home, I said softly. We'll start again, but not under the same roof. Brandon nodded, no argument. As long as you don't feel safe, I won't come close. He stood about to leave, but then he paused, pulled a small slip of paper from his shirt pocket. One last thing. He set the paper in front of me. I looked down. A single handwritten line, neat and steady. I chose you, and I'll choose you again. Every day, if you'll let me. I folded the note, slid it into my pocket. I didn't say a word, but I didn't push it back either. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just a door. Open just wide enough for light to come in after months of darkness. I started noticing the familiar silver SUV parked across from the library every Tuesday morning. At first I wasn't sure, could have been coincidence, but then it showed up again on Wednesday and Friday, always in the same spot, same hour, engine running, window slightly cracked, like someone was watching but didn't want to be seen. The 4th time, I stopped halfway up the library steps and stared directly at the vehicle. Through the dark-tinted window, I clearly saw Clarissa's face behind her sunglasses. Unflinching. Cold. I texted Brandon. Your mom is parked outside the library 3 days in a row. His reply came minutes later. I'll call the police. Stay inside. I stood behind the glass entrance and watched from a distance. 17 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Clarice stepped out of her car like she was strolling through a park, her face feigning concern. I heard her voice rise. I'm just worried about my son. He's being isolated. He's not himself anymore. His wife is hiding something. The officers blocked her path, saying something I couldn't hear. Clarice suddenly changed her tone. Her hands shook. Her voice cracked like she was on stage. I just want to see my grandchild. I haven't done anything wrong. At that moment, Meredith, my neighbor and the one who helped me leave that night, was standing beside me in the library. She pulled out her phone and whispered, "Want proof for a restraining order?" I nodded. She recorded the entire scene, Clarissa's shift in tone, the performance, and her dramatic outburst as she was asked to leave. "My son's been brainwashed. That baby is a trap. It's not even his." I clenched my fists. I'd had enough. At our couples therapy session the following week, I handed the phone to Dr. Raina Moore, our marriage counselor, and placed it silently on the table. Brandon sat beside me, silent as the video played. No one spoke as his mother's voice filled the room, sweet, then venomous, then shrieking, all in under a minute. I looked over at Brandon. His face had gone pale. One hand covered his forehead, the other gripped the armrest. His eyes locked on the screen like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "I didn't edit anything," I said softly. Brandon nodded slowly, then exhaled like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "It was her," he muttered, "exactly like when my dad left." I turned to look at him. For the first time, Brandon opened up. "Dad left when I was 17. Back then, Mom screamed for a whole week, broke things, called the entire family together to accuse him of cheating, but later I overheard her talking to Aunt Myra, sounding just like in that video, laughing and saying, 'Finally got rid of him.'" Brandon looked at me, guilt flooding his eyes. I grew up between two versions of the same person, and I chose to believe the performance instead of the truth right in front of me. Dr. Moore nodded, her voice steady and calm. "Emotional manipulation, especially from a parent, is hard to recognize when it's all you've ever known. But Brandon, every time you choose Lucy over that control, you're breaking the cycle." Brandon turned to me, and for the first time, his eyes weren't guarded. "I know I don't deserve it, but I won't let her hurt you or the baby. I've already contacted a lawyer. They're preparing the paperwork for a protective order." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. It wasn't total relief, but it was something. A sliver of ease knowing I wasn't the only one who saw Clarice for who she truly was. At the end of the session, Brandon gently held my hand. Not tight, not demanding, just a quiet signal. "I'm learning, and I won't leave you alone anymore." I entered the 7th month of pregnancy with both awareness and caution. Even as my belly grew larger each day, I couldn't let my guard down, not with the shadow of Clarice lingering. After that therapy session, Brandon suggested we put together a detailed plan to protect me and the baby. No more vague promises, no more "I'll handle it." Only real, concrete steps. We changed my delivery schedule to a different hospital over 30 minutes away from our previous home. The new hospital had a private security protocol for high-risk maternity cases. My medical records were encrypted under a false name, and only 3 people had access. Me, my OBGYN, and Brandon. My official emergency contact was Meredith, the one person I had trusted from the very beginning. Brandon no longer stayed with me, but he showed up without fail at every ultrasound appointment, bringing security camera layouts, shift schedules for the building's security team, and a list of new door codes for the apartment I was temporarily living in. One Monday afternoon, while folding newborn clothes in the bedroom, the doorbell rang. Meredith went to answer it and came back with a beige box tied in a black ribbon. No sender, no return address. I sat up, feeling like a stone had just dropped inside my chest. Meredith opened it, peeling back the tissue paper. Inside was a pale gray stuffed animal. An unfamiliar shape, neither rabbit nor bear. But its eyes. Dark, sunken, stitched in red thread, rough and unsettling. At the bottom of the box was a small card, handwritten in brownish red ink. "She'll need someone who knows how to raise her. Blood is still blood, Lucy." I didn't scream. I didn't throw it. I just stared at the words until the letters blurred from tears I refused to let fall. Brandon arrived less than 20 minutes later, still in his work shirt, out of breath from running up 3 flights of stairs. He looked at the stuffed animal, said nothing, pulled out his phone, took a photo, and sealed it in a Ziploc bag. "I'm taking this to the lawyer's office. We'll add it to the permanent protective order file." He looked at me, not with anger but with solid resolve. "We won't let her cross any more lines." We upgraded the apartment's indoor and outdoor security cameras, changed every access code, set up an emergency signal between me and Meredith. 3 missed calls in a row would mean immediate danger. Brandon also added his friend Nate, a local officer, to our emergency support list. During a follow-up session, Dr. Moore asked, "Do you feel safer now?" I replied, "Not completely, but at least I know who's standing with me." Brandon sat beside me, didn't interrupt. He simply placed his hand on the table. Close but not touching. Respectful. That's how he was relearning love. With space. With patience. The following week I got a call from the hospital's administrative office. Someone had been repeatedly contacting them, claiming to be the patient's biological mother, saying I was suffering from pregnancy depression and needed special oversight. I didn't need to guess. Clarice? When Brandon found out, he immediately had my records moved to a higher secretary department. He requested the hospital revise all verification protocols and registered me under Meredith's address instead of the old one. "Every trace will be erased. She has no rights over you or the baby anymore." I nodded silently, but inside I knew. Brandon was truly fighting now. He was no longer the man who used to stay quiet behind Clarice's back. That night he sat beside me in the nursery we'd just finished. Mint green walls with white trim, illustrations of forests, owls, and spotted deer hanging neatly across the room. I looked at him and said softly, "If there's one thing I fear the most, it's not her. It's our child growing up in fear." Brandon replied without hesitation. "Our child will grow up knowing that their parents did everything they could to break that cycle, starting now." I went into labor at 3:12 a.m. on a quiet March morning. No thunder, no heavy rain, just a dull contraction pulling me out of restless sleep. I sat up, hands on my belly, feeling each tightening like a reminder. It was time. Brandon arrived the moment he got Meredith's message. The hospital bag had been packed the week before, the car tank full, every step of the plan double-checked. He didn't ask too many questions, just said, "I'm here, let's go." Meredith came with us, sitting in the back seat, eyes locked on her phone, keeping contact with the hospital and Tom, her husband, a local police officer assigned to oversee my personal security throughout labor. When we reached Mercy Oaks Hospital, I was taken straight to the high-security maternity ward. Every entry point was fingerprint controlled. My patient ID wasn't under my real name, but an encrypted code known only to my OB, attending nurses, and one senior security officer. Brandon was issued a temporary guest badge with limited hours, while Meredith waited outside with Tom, who stood silently in front of the delivery room door, radio in hand, eyes never leaving the hallway. Inside the softly lit room that smelled faintly of peppermint oil, I lay on a high hospital bed, listening to the fetal monitor beeping steadily. Dr. Hannah Royce entered with a warm smile. "Lucy, today's the big day. Everything is ready." I nodded, squeezing Brandon's slightly trembling hand. He looked at me, no longer afraid, just focused. Focused on grounding me through each increasingly intense wave of pain. The contractions came like crashing waves, each one tearing down the layers of strength I had tried so hard to hold together. I thought I could deliver in silence, but in the end, I couldn't hide the shaking, the creeping panic. Brandon never left my side. He didn't say much, just whispered when I gasped for air. "You're doing so well, you're not alone." At 11:17 a.m., under the bright delivery lights and the nurse's rhythmic counting, a small cry pierced the room. I collapsed back onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably at the sound of that first cry. A scream of life, raw and entirely belonging to my daughter. "A healthy baby girl," the doctor announced. 6 pounds 13 ounces, strong lungs, pink skin. "What's her name?" Brandon looked at me. I nodded, voice choked. "Emma. Her name is Emma Grace Walters." The nurse brought her over and placed her on my chest. Emma opened her eyes. Blurred. Soaked. And my entire world shrank into those tiny pupils. That afternoon while I rested, a hospital staff member brought in a bouquet of white roses tied with a purple ribbon and a card. It read, "For the granddaughter who will one day need to know the truth." Meredith immediately snapped a photo and called for Tom, who was just outside. He said nothing, just nodded and placed the bouquet into a numbered evidence bag. Brandon walked in just as Tom was walking out. He saw my face, then the photo on Meredith's phone. He didn't wait a second. "I'm taking this to the attorney tonight. She's violated the no-contact terms. There will be consequences this time." I didn't stop him. That night, Tom stayed at the hospital. He sat outside my room the entire night, a steady presence. No strangers appeared. No sign of Clarice. But our guards stayed up, not from fear, but because we'd learned one thing: peace must be fiercely protected. Brendan cradled Emma in his arms while she slept. He was no longer the man who once stood silent as I crumbled. Now, he sat beneath soft golden light, whispering little stories into our daughter's ear, as if weaving a new version of himself. I returned home with Emma on a sunny morning, the first sunshine after weeks of damp April rain. Brandon opened the door gently, like even the smallest noise might wake the baby, and the moment I stepped in, I knew everything had changed. The sharp lavender oils Clarice once insisted on were gone. So was the family photo above the dining table that read "Blood is family," the one she demanded we keep. No more crystal jars of peppermint candy quietly watching from the bookshelf. Instead, warmth filled the space. The living room had been repainted a soft gray. One corner had been transformed into a nook for Emma, a rocking chair, plush rugs, and a basket of tiny toys. The bedroom had new linens, even the summer blankets folded exactly the way I liked. Not the rigid military square fold Clarice used to impose. Brandon didn't say a word about the changes. He simply helped me hold Emma, kissed her forehead, and gently laid her in the new bassinet by the window. Light filtered through the white curtains, making my eyes blur, not from exhaustion, but from peace. Those first few days were full of challenges: sleepless nights, 2 a.m. diaper changes, sudden cries that jolted us up like soldiers on alert. But Brandon never missed a beat. He learned how to swaddle, how to hold her without bending her neck, how to soothe her with a quiet song. One he chuckled at himself for getting the lyrics wrong. One night I woke up to make a bottle and saw the kitchen light already on. He was there in an old t-shirt, gently shaking the formula bottle, eyes still heavy with sleep. When he saw me, he whispered, "Go rest a little more, I just changed her." I didn't step forward, I just stood and watched. The man who once broke me, now stitching things back together, quietly, one act at a time. 2 weeks later, we went grocery shopping together for the first time since Emma's birth. A calm Sunday morning. Emma slept soundly in her stroller. I pushed the cart and Brandon picked out milk, detergent, and whole wheat bread. Like he'd memorized my list. I was picking out fruit when Brandon suddenly froze, eyes locking in place. I turned, my heart tightening. Clarice. She stood at the far end of the aisle, holding a bunch of arugula, eyes locked on Emma in the stroller. Her gaze wasn't fierce. It was calculated, persistent. I moved closer to Brandon, but he'd already turned his back, positioning himself between us and his mother. "Let's go," he said quietly. "Brandon?" Her voice rang out sharper than necessary. "Are you really going to keep me from seeing my grandchild?" He didn't turn, didn't say a word. "You'll regret this. I raised you. I have the right." Brandon walked straight to the customer service desk. I followed, one hand on the stroller. He said something quietly to the staff, pointing in Clarice's direction. They nodded immediately, picked up the phone, and called security. I didn't need to hear it to know. It was all pre-planned. Clarice was escorted out. I saw her glance back, eyes wild, lips still moving. But this time, no one was listening. Brandon turned back, looked at me and Emma, then said gently, "This isn't running anymore. It's setting boundaries." That night, while I was putting Emma to sleep in her room, Brandon quietly walked into the kitchen and poured me a glass of orange juice, just like he used to when I was still pregnant. He set it on the table, then sat down beside me. "I know, redemption isn't something you prove with words, but I won't stop trying. Every single day." I didn't answer, but I placed my hand over his and looked at our daughter, breathing peacefully next to us. We didn't go back to where we started. We had come too far for that. But in this renewed home, free from the scent of control, free from the shadows of cold words, we began again. Not to forget, but to keep living. For Emma, and for the things worth protecting. My story isn't about revenge or winning. It's about learning how to rise when you've been pushed to your edge. Some people you believe are your safe place end up being the ones who lead you astray. I've learned that in order to protect my child, I must first protect myself, with clear boundaries, conscious choices, and the belief that I deserve a life of peace, free from manipulation and fear. And Emma is the reason I chose to begin again. What do you think about Lucy's decision and the journey she's been through? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, emotional stories about family, love, and strength. I never thought this day would come. I had imagined many things about my future, a stable job, a cozy little house, trips to faraway places, but marriage had never been on that list. I didn't hate the idea of marriage, but I never dreamed about it like other girls did. Growing up with only my father by my side, I had become accustomed to an independent life, taking care of myself without needing anyone else. And yet, here I was, preparing to step into a marriage I never expected. My name is Amelia, I'm 31 years old, and I work as a financial manager at an investment firm in New York. I have lived in this city for over a decade, burying myself in work, never once thinking that I would meet someone who would make me want to settle down. But then I met Daniel, a 34-year-old man with a warm smile and rare patience. Daniel wasn't the type of man I usually noticed. He didn't stand out in a crowd, he wasn't flashy or overly charming with sweet words. But there was something about him that made me feel safe. He was patient with me in a way no one else had ever been. Never rushing, never pressuring. We met through a mutual friend, Chloe, my close colleague. Chloe was always worried that I was too focused on work and neglecting my personal life, so one day, she arranged a casual meetup between me and Daniel. At first, I wasn't too excited. I was used to dining alone or immersing myself in reports rather than spending time dating. But Daniel was different from the men I had met before. He persistently invited me out, even though I turned him down a few times at the beginning. He never got upset when I told him I wasn't sure if I was ready for a serious relationship. "That's okay, Amelia. I'll wait until you're ready to open your heart," he once told me. And little by little, I let him into my life. After 6 months, I realized that Daniel's presence had become an essential part of my busy days. The good morning texts, the quick phone calls during lunch breaks, the simple evenings cooking together instead of going to fancy restaurants. All these little things made me realize that I had fallen for him without even noticing. A year after we met, Daniel got down on one knee and proposed to me during a quiet outdoor picnic. There were no fireworks, no grand romantic gestures like in the movies, just the two of us, under the evening sky, and a simple question. "Amelia, do you want to spend the rest of your life with me?" I thought I might be scared that I would hesitate, but instead I just laughed and said, "Yes." And so I, the person who once thought I would stay single forever, agreed to get married. But what I didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a story I never saw coming. When Daniel suggested that I meet his parents over the weekend, I felt a bit uneasy. It wasn't that I was afraid of meeting my in-laws, I was confident and independent, but there was something in Daniel's tone that made me pause. He didn't sound as excited as I had expected. Instead, he seemed a bit hesitant. "My parents are a little traditional," Daniel said as we sat in our usual cafe. "They might be a bit strict at first, but don't worry, everything will be fine." His words made me think, what exactly did he mean by a little traditional? Would they be formal and principled, or would they be judgmental and difficult? Either way, I couldn't avoid this meeting. If I was going to marry Daniel, I needed to know what his parents were like. On Saturday morning, we drove out of New York to his parents' house in the suburbs of Connecticut. Their home was large, situated in an upscale neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns. But as I stepped inside, the atmosphere wasn't as warm as I had hoped. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," Daniel said cheerfully as we entered the living room. "So you finally made it," a woman's voice rang out. I turned and saw Eleanor, Daniel's mother, staring at me. Her sharp eyes scanned me from head to toe, barely hiding her scrutiny. I smiled politely and stepped forward, extending my hand. "I'm Amelia. It's a pleasure to meet you." But instead of shaking my hand, she simply gave a slight nod, her voice cold. So, you're Amelia." No compliment, no warm greeting, just a distant nod as if I were an uninvited guest. Richard, Daniel's father, seemed slightly more approachable. He shook my hand but still maintained a reserved demeanor. So, what do you do? Daniel mentioned you work in finance? Yes, I'm a financial manager at an investment firm, I replied, keeping my tone natural. Oh. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. That's a rather stressful job, isn't it? But women don't usually last long in that industry. It's better to focus on family once you're married. I hesitated for a second but kept my smile. I love my job, and I believe that if someone manages their time well, they can balance both career and family. That's what all young women think before they get married, Eleanor scoffed, as if I had just said something foolish. Daniel gently squeezed my hand under the table, signaling me not to take it to heart, but that only made me more irritated. Where's Daniel's brother? I asked, trying to change the subject. Joshua is on his way, Richard said. He's very eager to meet you. A moment later, Joshua, Daniel's older brother, walked in. He was well dressed, but from the very first handshake I could tell that something was off. So, this is Amelia? Joshua smirked. Daniel, did you really choose a girl who grew up in a single-parent household? The room suddenly fell silent. I looked straight at Joshua, trying to stay composed. Is there something wrong with that? I asked, my voice slow but firm. Joshua shrugged. It's just that people who grow up without either a father or a mother aren't usually taught how to build a proper family. I'm sure you understand what I mean. I clenched my fists, but before I could respond, Eleanor cut in. We don't mean to offend you, Amelia, but family is very important. Daniel is our youngest son, the pride of this family. If you want to marry him, you must understand that this family has its own rules. Rules? I repeated. You must be fully devoted to Daniel and this family, she said firmly. Women in the Richards family always put family first. Career, ambitions, friends. Everything else comes second. Can you do that? I glanced at Daniel, hoping he would say something, but he remained silent. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I had mentally prepared myself to meet a traditional family, but I hadn't expected to face such rigid expectations and deep-seated prejudice. Daniel had told me his parents were a little strict, but I never imagined they would look down on me simply because I was raised by my father. They didn't care about who I was or what I had accomplished. For them, I was just someone expected to serve Daniel if I wanted to be part of this family. And the worst part was, Daniel didn't oppose them at all. Our wedding reception was held at a luxury hotel in New York, with over 150 guests, including friends, colleagues, and both families. I had always thought this would be a happy day the moment I stepped into a new chapter of my life. But I was wrong. Things started to go wrong from the very beginning of the event. Daniel's parents, Richard and Eleanor, showed up already tipsy, even though the reception had just begun. They were drinking hard liquor instead of wine like the other guests, while Joshua, Daniel's brother, sat with a few relatives, watching me with a judgmental glare. I tried to ignore them and focused on the warm congratulations from my friends. But then they started causing a scene. In the middle of the reception, as Daniel and I were greeting guests, Eleanor suddenly grabbed the microphone, her voice slurred from the alcohol. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" she called out, laughing loudly as she stumbled toward the stage. "I have a few words to say to our lovely bride." The entire hall fell silent, all eyes turning toward her. I looked at Daniel, hoping he would stop his mother, but he just gave an awkward smile, making no effort to intervene. Eleanor stared at me, then smirked. "Amelia, you are now officially part of the Richards family, but before you walk through this door you have to prove that you are worthy." I blinked, confused. "I don't understand, ma'am." "We can't just let our son marry someone who doesn't understand family responsibility," Richard interjected. "So, starting next month, you'll need to send us at least $1,500 every month as a token of gratitude. And of course, your annual bonuses will belong to this family as well." A murmur spread through the room. I stood frozen. Did they just say that? I turned to Daniel, hoping he would stand up for me, but he just shrugged. "I think it makes sense, Amelia," he said, his voice casual. "They raised me. It's our duty to give back to them." A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sorry, but that is not my obligation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mr. and Mrs. Richards, I respect this family, but my money is mine, and I am not here to financially support anyone else." "How dare you!" Eleanor practically screamed, her face red with alcohol and fury. "Who do you think you are to refuse your in-laws? You're just a motherless girl, someone who was never properly raised. How would you even know how to serve your husband and this family? The room went ice cold. I could hear my own sharp breathing as the weight of her words sank in. On the other side of the hall, my father, Thomas, had reached his breaking point. He stepped onto the stage, snatching the microphone from Eleanor's hand. Enough! His voice rang out, filled with anger, yet still composed. Do you even realize what you're doing? This is my daughter's wedding, not a place for you to insult her. Eleanor scoffed. We're just stating the truth, Mr. Thomas. You raised her alone, and as a result she turned into a girl who doesn't respect her in-laws. I told you, children raised without a father or mother never know how to build a real family. Her words felt like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. My father took a deep breath, disappointment filling his eyes. I thought Daniel's family was well educated, but I was clearly mistaken. If this is how you treat my daughter, then I consider it a blessing that she will not become part of your family. I turned to Daniel, hoping he would stand up for me, but he said nothing, staring at the floor in silence. And in that moment, I knew I could not go through with this marriage. I took the microphone from my father's hand and looked directly at Daniel's family. Thank you for this lovely event. But I have made my decision. This marriage ends right here. The entire hall fell into a stunned silence. Daniel's parents gasped, Joshua looked dumbfounded, and Daniel turned pale as a ghost. I placed the engagement ring on the table, turned around and walked out of the reception, leaving behind a family I never wanted to belong to. The room remained silent in the wake of my announcement. Shocked gazes and hushed whispers filled the space. I could see the stunned faces of Daniel's parents, Richard and Eleanor, completely frozen, while Daniel looked like he had just taken a brutal hit to his pride. My father Thomas stepped forward, his sharp eyes fixed on the Richards family, his presence still calm but commanding. He turned to Richard, locking eyes with him as if carefully considering his next words. Richard, my father said slowly, his voice steady yet powerful, I think you should reconsider the words you just said. Richard scoffed, trying to hold on to the last remnants of his pride. I don't think we have anything left to discuss, Thomas. Your daughter just humiliated my family by calling off the wedding in front of everyone. My father crossed his arms and gave a knowing smile. Oh, is that so? Funny, because from where I'm standing, the only one humiliating himself here is you, Richard. The room grew tense. My father continued, his voice calm but razor sharp. I'm guessing you have no idea who I happen to know in your company, do you? Richard's expression shifted slightly. What are you talking about? My father casually adjusted his tie, then delivered a single sentence that left the entire room in stunned silence. I'm a close friend of Henry Wallace, the CEO of the company where you serve as Vice President of Finance. Silence fell over the hall. I could see the color drain from Richard's face. If he had been clinging to any sense of arrogance before, it was now completely replaced by sheer panic. Whispers rippled through the crowd again, but this time the murmurs were no longer sympathy for me but mockery directed at Richard and his family. Impossible! Richard stammered, looking at my father with pure horror in his eyes. My father let out a light chuckle. Oh, but it's true. Henry and I have been friends since college. He was also raised by a single mother, just like me and Amelia. Do you remember what you just said, Richard? You insulted every person who grew up in a single-parent household, including the very man who holds your career in his hands. Sweat began to bead on Richard's forehead. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by genuine fear. Laughter erupted from the guests. Some murmured among themselves while others openly enjoyed watching my father completely outmaneuver Richard. If Henry hears about this... Do you really think you'll keep your position, Richard? My father asked pointedly, his tone no longer playful. Eleanor stood frozen, her face pale. Joshua, who had just looked down on me for being raised by a single father, now looked like he wanted to disappear into thin air. And then, right before my eyes, Richard dropped to his knees in front of my father. The entire room gasped, unable to believe what they were witnessing. A man who had once been so arrogant and powerful was now on his knees, begging before the very person he had once looked down on. Thomas, please, Richard's voice trembled. I misspoke. Please don't tell Henry. I don't want to lose my position. How interesting, my father said slowly. Earlier, you called me worthless because I was a single father, and yet here you are, kneeling before me, begging me to save your career? The entire hall erupted with laughter. I had never seen a humiliation this severe in my life. I turned to Daniel. He couldn't even look at me anymore. He just stood there, his head hung low, unable to say a word. And in that moment I knew I had truly escaped a nightmare. I looked straight at Daniel, my words crystal clear for everyone to hear. This marriage ends right here. A shockwave rippled through the hall. Guests whispered among themselves, some gawking in disbelief as they witnessed a bride canceling her own wedding in front of everyone. I saw a few of Daniel's colleagues with their mouths open, and some guests even pulled out their phones to record the moment. Daniel stood frozen, his face completely drained of color. "Amelia, what are you saying?" his voice cracked. I had no patience left. I looked straight at him, the man I once thought would protect me but who turned out to be nothing more than a coward. "Daniel, you stood there, silent, while your parents humiliated me, demanded that I financially support them, and acted like it was completely normal. You didn't just let them insult me, you let them disrespect the man who raised me on his own for years. You know what? You are not worth another second of my time." A wave of gasps filled the room. I saw Daniel's parents, Richard and Eleanor, pale as ghosts, and Joshua, completely stiff, like a statue. Without a moment of hesitation, I slipped the wedding ring off my finger and placed it on the table in front of Daniel. "We never registered the marriage, so I owe you nothing." My father stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. He took the microphone and spoke firmly and clearly. "And to avoid any misunderstandings, my daughter and I will be returning all the wedding gifts. We don't need anything from this family." I turned to the event manager and asked them to start the process of returning the envelopes to each guest. The guests looked at each other, unsure of how to react. Some stood up and applauded, perhaps those who had also found Daniel's family outrageous but had remained silent. Others scoffed, whispering among themselves, undoubtedly mocking the humiliation of the Richards family. I walked out of the reception with my father, leaving chaos behind, but I didn't care what happened next. I knew that this was just the beginning of the real downfall, but this time, the ones suffering the consequences wouldn't be me. Within a week, news of the cancelled wedding spread like wildfire through Daniel's company. His colleagues, many of whom had attended the wedding, didn't waste any time spreading the story. No one respected a man who let his parents control him so completely that he was willing to betray his fiancée. The result? Daniel couldn't handle the shame and resigned. A man who once took so much pride in his career was now leaving in disgrace. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Richard, Daniel's father, faced even greater consequences. After my father revealed his friendship with CEO Henry Wallace, the news quickly reached the company's executives. A private meeting was held soon after. The outcome? Richard was demoted and transferred to a small branch in a remote town in Texas. For someone who had once held the title of Vice President of Finance, being reassigned to such a low-level position was nothing short of a slap to his dignity. The Richards family lost all respect among their relatives. I heard that their extended family, the same people who once admired them, began to distance themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a family that was both greedy and publicly disgraced in front of hundreds of guests. As for Eleanor, the woman who once took so much pride in having a prestigious family, she could no longer even lift her head in public. Sitting in our usual cafe with my father, I looked at him and smiled. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. I took a sip of my coffee, exhaling in relief. "No, Dad. Calling off that wedding was probably the smartest decision I've ever made." He chuckled, patting my hand gently. "I'm proud of you, Amelia. You're stronger than you think." I smiled, feeling lighter than ever. I had freed myself from a terrible future, and more importantly, I had reclaimed my own worth. And my story was far from over. After ending my engagement with Daniel, I began spending more time with my father, Thomas. Without the weight of a toxic marriage hanging over me, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and clarity. We had deeper conversations, making up for lost time. Time I had once wasted chasing work and a relationship that was never meant to be. "Do you know how proud I am of you, Amelia?" he asked one afternoon as we sat in his office drinking tea. "You chose yourself instead of bowing to a family that didn't deserve you. That's something your mother would have been proud of too." I smiled. My mother had passed away when I was young, And since then my father had been both my mom and dad. He had sacrificed so much to give me the life I had today. He set his teacup down, his gaze turning more serious. Amelia, I've been thinking a lot about something. Have you ever considered taking over my company? I blinked in surprise. You mean, taking your place? Thomas & Associates was a financial consulting firm my father had built over 20 years. While I had a successful career in finance, I had never imagined leading an entire company. I'm not pressuring you, he assured me, but I believe you can do it. You have the skills, the experience, and, most importantly, the independent mindset of a true leader. I sat in silence. I had always believed my career path was within my current investment firm. But now a new door was opening in front of me. For the next few weeks, I thought long and hard about my father's offer. My focus shifted completely. Dating, romance, it no longer seemed important. I had once thought that marrying Daniel would be the biggest milestone in my life, but I was wrong. The real turning point was choosing a new path for my future. I was no longer a woman preparing for marriage. I was a woman stepping into leadership. After many sleepless nights, I made my decision. I resigned from my job and joined my father's company. I'll give it my all, Dad, I told him on a Monday morning as I officially stepped into my new office at Thomas & Associates. He smiled. I never doubted that for a second, Amelia. Looking back at everything I had been through, I knew calling off the wedding was the best decision I had ever made. If I hadn't stood my ground that day, I would have been trapped in a life of control, misery, and injustice. But now I had a future I was in control of, a future that belonged to me and no one else. I chose myself, and I had never felt stronger. Looking back, I realized that losing something you thought was